Welcome back to another episode of Compact Combos. I have a guest here today, Klaus. And first of all, Klaus, the reason why we have you on here today is because you've made a new type of war game, one that I've never heard of before in traditional wargaming senses. So maybe you can go ahead and start off with who you are and maybe the game you've designed.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. I think the easiest place to start with is to say that what I do, and I call it real-time wargaming, is that what it does is that instead of traditionally you have turns, you have I go, you go, or you activate this unit, I activate that unit. There are many different ways of doing it. I've decoupled the turn from the player. So there are still turns, so to speak, but they're tied to the units on the board. And that means that if you look at a battlefield and you see a lot of miniatures there, then I put some sand timers on the board as well, small hourglasses. And any commander that has a small hourglass that is empty can order troops around. And then when you're done with that commander, then you flip the timer, and then the commander can't do anything. He doesn't have a turn until that timer has run out. And that means that if you just have one commander on the table, then it's no different than I take a turn, you take a turn. But if you have 20, then suddenly some of the sand is running out at different times, and somebody's ready to act and somebody's not, and somebody's busy over here. So that's the one thing, is that it, instead of it being very ordered and turn-based, it happens all at the same time. So that's number one thing. Number two is that traditionally in wargaming, whether it's historical or Warhammer, that sort of thing, you usually have a lot of communication with the other player. You say, I shoot at your Roman Imperial Guard, and okay, I hit three of them, do some armor saves, and blah, 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 and you take them off the table. Here, nobody waits for anybody. So if I shoot your Imperial Guard and I hit them, I take them off the table. You don't get to learn about it until you look over at that portion of the battlefield and find out, didn't I have some Imperial Guard? Well, now you don't. So those two things are the big differences between what I do and most war games. One is that you don't have turns. It's decided by when our commander is available, when are they ready for orders, and that is happening all over the board. And the second is nobody waits for anybody. So everything happens simultaneously and chaotically.
Wow. War is chaos, right? There is no order about it. Even in the era of linear warfare, where it's all prim and proper, sort of say it's sometimes more chaotic than even modern war. Some would say.
Very true. Very true.
So the hourglass. So how long does the actual player have the time to move? Yeah, I know they can move once the sand runs out, but then you just restart it back. Is that kind of how that?
Yeah, then you restart back. So if we take, let's say, American Civil War, right? Classic, and something the audience will know is that imagine you have something like some sort of small thing like First Manassas, some sort of, not small, but it's not Gettysburg
Yeah,
yet,
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have, let's say you fight Gettysburg, and you say you have 30 units on each side. And then a unit is a couple of thousand men, and suddenly you have the whole battlefield. And all those units are just standing on the table, beautiful miniatures, but they don't do anything. And then you introduce the commander figures, where you take some of your generals, and next to each general, you place an hourglass, one of these small sand timers. And then each of the commanders has a command range, and anybody who's within range, they can give orders to. And those command ranges are quite short. So I usually use 2-inch bases, and command range is 4 inches. So it means that a commander can give orders to something like 5 to 10 different units if they're in close formation. And then once he's done giving orders to all those units, once you've moved them and shot and so on, then you move the commander last, and you flip the hourglass, and then he can't do anything until that hourglass runs out. And whether that's 60 seconds or 2 minutes or 3 minutes depends on how fast a game you want.
Wow, that is a crazy crazy concept. I'm very interested already. Um, we we've had in our club at least, like we have had hourglasses, of course, but that's just for like, all right, your side go 3 minute timer, and then everyone on their side goes. But doing it all at the same time with that method, especially tied with the commanders. At first, I was thinking it was with every individual base, but with the
I
commanders,
have
it's a
I
lot.
have that too. I have that too. But that requires specialist bases. So for my 7 Years' War, my Leuthen 1757 battle, which is Prussians against Austrians, and there's 33,000 Prussians and 65,000 Austrians. And that's been converted to, in the game I had, for the figures I had, 300 figures on the table. And they are all on four by 4 inch bases with room for an hourglass and a hit point die. So they also have hit points and can rest. And that means that that individual units there have the timers tied to them, and the commanders function a bit differently. But that means the big setup of that is an 18 by 4 foot table and has 90 units on the table with timers. And
Wow.
that is absolute madness, because all those timers, they're running at different times and they're different lengths of timer. So the artillery is slower than the cavalry, etc. And the Prussians are faster than the Austrians, to make it even better, to simulate that they are better trained and have a higher rate of fire. So they move faster on the tabletop.
Wow, I didn't think about that. Also, like the different timers equal different form of units, right? Whether it be
Bingo.
veteran or artillery. That's amazing. Yeah, I know. That seems like a lot of chaos, especially for the overall commander who has maybe like 5 players underneath them.
For
I can
example, yes.
understand different things happen all at once. Wow, very fluid battlefield. I really like that. And like I've never heard of this ain't before. So, what's inspired you to make something like this? What gave you the idea to make a game like this?
So I think here we come into something a little bit interesting about me, if I say so myself. That is that I don't have a past in historical wargaming. In fact, I had not even looked at historical wargaming for the last 30 years. I played a lot of so when I was 15, a friend and I did miniature war games with our 172 Napoleonic figures, or with his, more correctly, at his house. And we had a very simple rule set where we'd have a 20-sided die, and we would agree on the difficulty, and then we would roll one figure at a time. It was insanely slow. So it'd be like, yeah, that guy's going to shoot that guy. Okay, that's a 12. Okay, good. I rolled that one. Ah, that's harder. He's undercover. That's a 14.
Yeah.
The only thing we had that was interesting, because that was, of course, completely absurd. The only thing we had that was interesting was that when we used cannons, we would literally roll the quite round D20 into the figures, and whatever was hit died. So that was fun. But we did that as like a fun, just teenagers. That then later I started playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle with friends, and did that for some years, for like a couple of years, and got to geek out a lot. So if you'd asked me in 1998, I could recite most of the army books and the stat lines and so on for the whole shebang, not just my own orcs. So we played a lot of that. And I remember buying the rule set to something called Command Decision in like 96 or 97, maybe, and reading that and thinking historical battles sound really interesting, but this is way too complex, and never played a single game, right? So I bought the rule set, never played a single game. And then I left that and I sold my orcs when I was about 20 in the late 90s. Uh, and then I didn't really do that. Then I did role playing, live action role playing. That's where my past is. And I didn't really touch wargaming for many, many years. Board games, yes, but not miniatures, not wargaming. And I sniffed at Flames of War. I
Yeah.
bought some Russians, and I never played a single game. And I gave them to somebody else. And then here in Christmas last year, I went out with a completely different thing in mind, and I thought, let me buy a few figures, because I was doing a lot of leadership training at the time, or I do a lot of leadership training, and I use military history there. And I thought it might be nice to say, when you talk about a tank, then you put a tank on the table. So when you're discussing tactics and leadership from military history, then have a few props, but just as props for my workshops. And then I bought a few figures, and then I thought, now I have a few figures, why not make a small game, just like a 5-minute thing to demonstrate some stuff? And then I thought, why not make a slightly bigger thing
Yeah.
and make that the thing? So instead of teaching leadership with that as a gimmick, then I would teach leadership using miniature wargaming. That was my thought. And I started looking at rules, and I started developing something, and I started playtesting. I used my 8-year-old daughter as a playtester, because if she gets it, then probably a 40-year-old executive might get it. That was the thinking. So she's an excellent playtester there. and I developed something that was fast, a lot faster than most historical systems,
Sure.
but not fast enough. Because if you consider, let's say you're 10 people in some sort of sales team or leadership group, and it's a corporate thing, and you're not a gamer and you're not really interested in history, and this guy puts some figures on the table, it has to move fast for you not to lose interest.
Right.
And whatever I came up with, it wasn't fast enough. So I talked to a friend who's a professional game designer, and he said, "Why don't you do it real time?" I said, I don't know how to do a real time board game. What the hell even is that?"
Yeah.
He said, "Well, if you could fix that, then it's fast enough." And I
Right.
bought some stand timers and did some experimenting, and then that Saga, our daughter, wasn't a big fan of that. She liked the turn based more. And then I invited my wife as well for to those two could play me, and they got into an argument because my wife's very competitive when she plays games. She'll be like, "Stay on mission," and da da da. So she was saying, "Saga, you're too slow," and Saga was complaining that she wasn't allowed to command her own troops. And they were getting into an actual fight, not a fist fight, but they were arguing. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. There's something there. And from then I went down the real time route. So it started as a leadership training for corporate leaders, and then it but and I still do that, and that's where most of the money comes in. It's not like the Wargamers pay me,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I thought that since I'm doing that, how about just doing it as a game? Does that work? And then I invited some people to test, and they liked it, and then I tried it some more, and they liked it, and then it kind of blew up from there. So it started as leadership training for corporates, and then as a side note, because I needed to live by some constraints there about speed and simplicity, it turned out that that actually worked as a rather unusual war game.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, and that's very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting. You have people from all kind of walks of life coming into wargaming. You know, like I wargame with a guy that he works on the railroad, policemen, doctors, you know, tailors. So I mean, everyone from all walks of life bringing their own little bits and pieces, and especially for you to just make a game. So that's very interesting. So as far as the game is concerned, is it more based around in the way you talked about, like a brand new person can easily pick up this rule set?
Oh,
Um,
this is made so this is made so I can teach somebody to play in 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, and after 20 minutes, we will have played a full battle.
that is a lot quicker than a lot of other battles.
So one of the promises I made, I recently had the huge pleasure of joining the Little Wars TV guys in Waterloo in Belgium.
Oh wow.
And then we played Waterloo. So we did a battlefield tour. I was lucky enough to join their tour, and then in the evening we played Waterloo, the battle, and that was 12 players. And I said, "Gentlemen, we will play 12-player Waterloo in 20 minutes." And of course, they thought I was nuts because Napoleonics is known to be even worse time
Oh
wise than
yeah.
everything else. And at the end, I had to say, "I'm sorry, I couldn't deliver. This was 16 minutes."
Well, not a bad promise, I would say.
Not too bad. And of course, it means that for that to work, it is fast and furious, and it also is simple because normally you can take a moment and look in a rule book and check about modifiers and points values and lengths and this and this and that. And here, every time you need to check something, then the game goes on. There's no breaks, there's no pause, there's no
Yeah.
it's happening. So it needs to be simple. And one of the hard things has been to simplify it enough. I've gone through so many iterations where I've made it simpler, and I thought, okay, it can't get simpler than this. And yes, it could.
I mean, yeah, I think we're on version like 3.1 of our rule set we've been working on for like 4.5 years. So like I completely understand that. Um, for sure. So you probably think that the biggest challenge was just trying to refine that refinement of the game was your probably biggest challenge in making it.
So that's one. I think actually my biggest challenge has been to keep focused, because when I started this, it was leadership training disguised as a war game. And then accidentally, the war game for wargamers came out of that. And then I also started looking at a board game version which I'm looking at finding a developer or like a publisher for, as in a boxed thing, and trying to find out what's the angle for that, and then how's that supposed to look, and who's the target audience, that sort of thing. And I developed multiple scenarios at once, and at the beginning, the real time was just one of the things in my kind of catalog of different war games for different leadership challenges. So there's a Vietnam War one that has different challenges, and a World War II one that teaches different things. And at some point, I realized this real time thing was so strong that that was where I was going to put my eggs in that basket. So now everything I do, whatever time period is real time. And the last thing I've done, I just updated the rule set 3 days ago, was go from having a rule set that was made for a Napoleonic War, and then with guidelines on how you could do it yourself, to now it's a full system that works for any timeline, and then it has specific rules for specific periods. But there's an underlying engine that can go for any timeline, and then of course you have specifics for the specific time periods and specific conflicts. But creating that underlying rules engine was a little bit challenging, until I had some breakthroughs.
Right, yeah, and I saw, not just Napoleonic. I saw you include the World War II hike and shot, Rome as well, and very beautiful, simple rule set. I took a look at it; it looked very nice. I'll
Thank
make
you.
sure to put a link of it below in the video. Um, so, we kind of talked about it includes a whole bunch of eras. What about sizes? Is there like a certain scale of miniature that this is mainly meant for? Because our club mainly does 6 millimeter, but I've seen some of the photos of like 15, maybe 28 millimeter.
So here we get into something interesting, because one of the things, I played Warhammer back in the day, 30 years ago, and Warhammer is one figure, right? One dwarf is one dwarf, and historical wargaming tends to be, yes, there are skirmish games where one figure is one figure, but most of the time they're not.
Right.
And the moment something becomes a base, something becomes an abstraction, I find it much easier to work with the abstractions, because whether a base is a company or a platoon or a division or a brigade, well, as the moment it's not one figure is one figure, but abstraction, then it becomes less critical what the size is. Of course, you have different challenges. There's a difference between, are you commanding 10,000 troops or 100 troops
Right.
with the same 10 bases? But I find that it's not, I don't want to say that it's completely scale agnostic, but it's pretty close, because I operate with bases, and whether you have four figures on a base or whether a base is a company or it's a brigade doesn't matter too much for the underlying thing. The only thing that's tricky, and I write a little about this in the rules, is that the smaller the scale is, the more granular it is, the more people want details, and details are hard, right? If you're playing, we did Waterloo recently, that was 250 units on the board. That's crazy. 250 units, 50 commanders, and that means roughly every unit is about 1,000 soldiers, roughly,
Yeah.
roughly. Uh, and if you're doing something where every unit is 10 soldiers, then it matters a lot more. It's not just, is it infantry, but is it, are these Panthers or Tigers or T-34s, or are they Panzer ones or Panzer fives, right? That's pretty big of a difference. Where if you're up at division level and you say this is a German Panzer division, this is 12,000 guys, roughly 300 tanks, then it's more easy to think, okay, what sort of tanks do they have? It'll work out. It's a tank division,
Right.
right? If like one base, one 2 by 2 inch base is a whole division, then you can do Kursk and huge battles. But then it doesn't matter too much what type they are. And there's a trade-off. That one of the things, of course, I've played heavy board games with a lot of detail. And of course it matters whether it's T-34s or it's KV-1s. Of course it matters. Of course it matters. Are these Russian Cossacks or are they Austrian dragoons?
Right.
Right? It matters. But it also means if everything has to be different, then it gets tricky to simulate. Where if it's just cavalry, right? In the rule set as is, the Napoleonic rule set has 3 unit types. It has cavalry, infantry, and artillery. And of course, that's not a lot of detail.
No.
So in the rules as they are right now, there's no difference between the French Old Guard and Russian conscript or kind of Russian just basic troopers. And in reality, of course, there was. But you can easily add to that. I've put in some rules where you can reasonably easy create a little bit of variance.
Right.
Some units will roll an extra die, and some will have this ability, and some will have that ability. But I think at bigger scales, it's easier because it's more tempting when you are at smaller scales to want more detail. And I do have some scenarios. I have a 1943 scenario where one player plays or one side is British paratroopers and they need to derail a train and get the information inside it, and the other is a few Germans and a lot of Italians. And every minute the train moves, so it physically moves on the battlefield
Oh wow.
every minute, and every minute more Italians arrive on the battlefield. And the Italians are not super good, but they just keep coming.
Right.
And that is one figure, and I play it with 28 millimeter. But then suddenly it's interesting. Do they have submachine guns? Do they have rifles? Is it an MG42 squad? Is it an MG34 squad? But I try not to fall into the detail trap, because while it's tempting, at the end of the day, it's harder to have complexity when you can't take breaks to look up the rules. So I try to keep it simple, even though I lose some complexity. And there will definitely be people who look at the rules I have and say, it's not detailed enough. It's not complex enough. You don't understand the intricacies of the suspension of the Char 1 in 1941 versus 1939. And I'll say, you are right. But the more you have to keep in your head, the harder it is to actually play. So I try to keep it very simple for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, the game isn't about reading a book the entire time, so I completely understand that. You don't want that, and it really seems like your game, if anything, would be a really good introduction for anyone who hasn't wargamed before, and they can move on from your set to more
Yes.
advanced things later
Yes.
on.
Very much so. I've seen already. I've had both positive and negative comments on some of my videos feature quite a lot of female players, and historical wargaming is not exactly known for its female playership. So I've had people, when they see that I have 50% women in some of my games, they're like, "How did you do that?" And most of them are positive about it. A few of them were not, but most of them very positive. And part of that is that by creating something that doesn't require a gaming background or even a history background, I've had players who had no idea. They'd never heard of the 7 Years' War, and they definitely not heard of the Battle of Leuthen, and they don't play games, and especially not war games. But because this is so different, 10 minutes later, they're yelling out orders and they're calling for reinforcements, and they're saying, no, we need to flank the Prussian cavalry, and having a shit ton of fun and saying, this was fun. So as a gateway drug, it's been proven to be very, very good as a gateway drug,
Well,
because it is fast and simple, and there's no waiting, right? They're one of the biggest critiques I hear from a lot of non-gamers is that a lot of especially heavy games, there's so much waiting. Where here, no waiting. And it means it's super stressful. Some people really do not like it because it is stressful, and you need to trust the other players because they're just picking your units off the table and you don't know what's going on.
yeah,
You don't see their dice rolls, you don't see their movement, you just see, I no longer have cavalry. I used to have a cavalry charge on the left flank, and it's now gone, and they've shot the general as well. What the hell just happened?
yeah,
Well, you don't know, you just have to accept it and deal with it.
yeah.
And that sits very badly with some players, but very, very nicely with a lot of new players.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's awesome. I know we've our club's had to work a lot because we do mainly 1-to-1 scale 6 millimeter. So every man is an actual man. There's no basic
Wild.
division. It's yeah. We had a game where it was a 7v7. We had like 15,000 men on the board, actual men, and
I love that.
we refought Guilford's courthouse to scale. Um,
Holy shit.
yeah, and NashCon next month in August. If anyone's in Nashville, we're doing the Battle of Camden 1-to-1 scale. But that being said, there are points where Man, dude, I gotta wait for this. I gotta wait for the Americans to get done with their side, and they're moving like 5,000 men. And so I'm sitting here on my phone, like, are you done yet? All right, it's
Yeah.
been 10 minutes, you know. So no, it'd be really cool to implement something like that. Um, Especially if not with like at least the general staff, right? Maybe not with every unit, but at least with the general staff for our scale. So that would be awesome. Um, so, is there one thing you hope wargamers get from this system? Is there like a central message that you're trying to convey to them about your game? Why should they come and try this game?
They should try it because number one, they should try it because it is fast and they get just the thing that you can easily play both sides in an hour, right? Imagine you not only get to play you get to play Brandywine and you get to do it twice in an evening. So you get to play both sides. That's pretty hard if you have one of these 5,000 people moving slowly on the table. So one is that it is fast, and that means it's accessible, both for gamers and non-gamers. That's one thing. Number two is that it becomes much less about strategy being about thinking, but more strategy being about acting. And that so it doesn't necessarily simulate the speed of a real 1778 battlefield, but it does simulate some of the command stress. And one of the things I've been told by former military officers, reserve officers, and people who used to be in the military say that it really works as a way of simulating that command stress because you never have enough, even though things are slow, you never have enough time. And keeping people in reserve is hard because you want them to be acting. But if nobody's in reserve, if nobody has empty timers because you got them to marsh, then they're not available. And I had one game. This was two Danish executives in their 50s, non-gamers, non-historians, and they tried because they're in my leadership network, and they thought, okay, let's try this thing Claus is working on. And they absolutely loved it, but one of them, and this was the Leuthen battle in 1757, one of them playing the Austrians had this moment where his cannons, his artillery units had 3-minute timers. So every time they do something, there's a 3-minute like load time before the unit can do something again.
Mm,
So the artillery is in a bad position, so he moves it into a better position. 3 minutes later, the battlefield is shifted, so he moves it again. 3 minutes later, he moves it again. And for 9 minutes, it wasn't shooting because he was trying to adjust to the battlefield. And he said afterwards, he said, if I just waited, if I just seen that empty timer and said, that's fine, they're in reserve. They're waiting to be used when I need them instead of feeling I have to move with them. Then I'd have gotten off a shot or two instead of zero in those 9 minutes. And
right.
he said, this is no different from when I have a software developer sitting and who's not busy. So of course I put them to work immediately because they're drawing a salary. But then when I need them 2 days later for an opportunity or a crisis, they're not there. Huh. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no,
So
I mean,
that is something that I hope some people will take away from it, that communication is doable in a real-time game, but it costs you. Every time you talk to the other players, every time you stand up and just look a moment, you could do that, but it costs you because time is running.
that
And
is,
learning to do
wow.
that while stressing is super useful, both as a leader in a normal organization, but especially when playing one of these things. And it is so easy to get into tunnel vision execution mode, where your head is down, you're looking at the table, you see what's going on just in front of you, and you have no idea what's happening on the other flank or what's happening just right next to you. And do the people on your team need help, or do you have units that are not doing anything because you're so focused on right here, right now? And that's a thing that of course happens in any game, but here more extremely so because the time pressure is constant.
Right. Yeah, no, excellent points, class. And I think as war gamers, sometimes we lose the point that we are trying to recreate and simulate these battles. Sometimes we get just so stuck in the rules of, oh, are they painted correctly and all that. Like the point, at least for our club, is to make us feel like and deal with the same problems, same issues that commanders on the ground were facing at the time. And you're not going to have that if you're stuck in rules There's no stress. There's no stress to that. So I really like your system. I like the chaos of battle. And that's something we as a club here love. We love the fog of war. And in combat, you get that tunnel vision. Maybe you're just stuck on this one company that's been stuck here, but you're not looking at the overall strategic situation on the battlefield. So that's really good. But Klaus, I appreciate you coming on here today, man. Where can people find you, find your rule set, or learn more about what you have?
So realtimewargaming.com is where I live for this. It has both the download of the rule set, the rules which are free. They're also on the Wargame library that the Little Wars TV gang has just created. So they also exist there, but they're hosted in both places. And there's a Facebook group for real-time miniature wargaming with some quite active members, and people are experimenting and doing their own stuff. And somebody will show up and say, "Hey, I've just created a naval rule set," and guy has come up with a thing where he even got rid of the sand timers to make it faster, where you're just placing order counters on the thing and recycling your counters. So that's pretty wild. And there are some guys who created a small and app version so you don't have to use sand timers, but can just have an app that shows you which commanders are ready. So instead of you flipping stuff on the table, you just say, okay, this guy's ready, move, click there if you don't want to clutter your battlefield. So some very, very lovely and active people from around the world. But Facebook group and then the website Real Time Wargaming. And it's still so new that I'm happy to talk to anybody. At some point, hopefully I'll get busy enough that I won't have the time for it. But right now I'll happily talk to anybody, and I find it super interesting whenever somebody plays a game and shares their learnings um, about it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I see you very active on all the Facebook groups, constantly sending updates, and commenting when people are posting about it. So I really appreciate that, Klaus. Thanks for coming on the channel today. And we'll hope to get this posted soon. Guys, we'll have a new Middle Colonies episode coming out very soon. I know you guys have been asking about episode 3. It's coming. So until then, get to painting.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.